This is Land of Havilah, 2 Chronicles 6. The priests just placed the ark in the temple. Solomon and all the elders of Israel are present for the occasion, standing in the courtyard. The Levite musicians are positioned east of the altar, singing and playing instruments as one. When they sang the words, "For he is good, for his loving kindness endures forever," Yahweh descended in glory. It came in the form of a cloud, filling the temple such that the priests weren't able to stand to minister. It was the same as happened when Moses set up the tabernacle. Yahweh filled it with a cloud of glory as he filled the temple just now. Exodus 40, verse 35. With Solomon and the assembly looking on, verse 1. Then Solomon said, Yahweh has said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. Comment: in Leviticus 16:2, Yahweh told Moses to tell Aaron that he shouldn't go into the Holy of Holies on any and every occasion, or he might die, because Yahweh would be present there in a cloud on the mercy seat, Leviticus 16:2. And Exodus 20, verse 21 says that God was in the thick darkness on Mount Sinai. In verse 1 that we just read, Solomon was remembering those scriptures when he said, Yahweh has said that he would dwell in the thick darkness. He's pointing out to himself that Yahweh's in the cloud. Now speaking to God, Solomon says, verse 2, But I've built you a house and home, a place for you to dwell in forever. Comment: he says to Yahweh, you dwell in smoke and cloud, and now the temple too. Now Solomon will speak to the people, beginning with how Yahweh's house and David's house got started. The history of them is intertwined. Verse 3. The king turned his face and blessed all the assembly of Israel, and all the assembly of Israel stood. He said, Blessed be Yahweh, the God of Israel, who spoke with his mouth to David my father, and as with his hands fulfilled it, saying, Since the day that I brought my people out of the land of Egypt, I chose no city out of all the tribes of Israel to build a house in, that my name might be there, and I chose no man to be prince over my people Israel. But now I've chosen Jerusalem that my name might be there, and I've chosen David to be over my people Israel. Now it was in the heart of David my father to build a house for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. But Yahweh said to David my father, Whereas it was in your heart to build a house for my name, you did well that it was in your heart. Nevertheless, you shall not build the house, but your son who will come out of your body, he shall build the house for my name. Comment: that was how the temple and the Davidic dynasty got started. David told Yahweh, I want to build a house for you. But Yahweh answered him, No, your son will build me a house. The only house between you and me is the one I'll build for you. He meant he'd build David a family dynasty. So what's become of Yahweh's word? Solomon says, verse 10, Yahweh has performed his word that he spoke, for I've risen up in the place of David my father and sit on the throne of Israel, as Yahweh promised, and have built the house for the name of Yahweh, the God of Israel. There I have set the ark, in which is Yahweh's covenant, which he made with the children of Israel. Comment: Solomon said, the ark in which is Yahweh's covenant. As the last chapter said in verse 10, there's nothing in the ark right now except for the 2 tablets with the 10 commandments. So Solomon's calling the 10 commandments the covenant. Why are the 10 commandments the covenant? A covenant is an agreement. The entire covenant between Yahweh and Israel is on scrolls. As documented in the scrolls of Moses, Israel has agreed to obey God's laws. That's their end of the covenant, obedience. And for Yahweh's end of it, he'll bless them abundantly if they're obedient, and if not, he'll send horrible disasters on them. Leviticus chapter 23. The covenant was written and ratified at Mount Sinai between Yahweh and Israel. Both sides ratified it. The tablets aren't the entire covenant, but they are a physical reminder of it. Like a wedding ring isn't the entire marriage, it's just a physical reminder that there is a marriage in place. So that's the sense in which Solomon's calling the tablets the covenant. Only a small part of the covenant is on the tablets, but the tablets represent the entire covenant. Verse 12. He stood before Yahweh's altar in the presence of all the assembly of Israel, and spread out his hands, for Solomon had made a bronze scaffold 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide, and 3 cubits high, and had set it in the middle of the court, and he stood on it and knelt down on his knees before all the assembly of Israel, and spread out his hands toward heaven, and he said, Yahweh, the God of Israel, there's no God like you in heaven or on earth. You who keep covenant and loving kindness with your servants who walk before you with all their heart, who have kept with your servant David my father that which you promised him. Yes, you spoke with your mouth and have fulfilled it with your hand, as it is today. Comment, just as Yahweh promised David, Solomon's on the throne, and he's built the temple that David envisioned. But Yahweh made more promises about the distant future coming up. Verse 16. Now therefore, Yahweh, the God of Israel, keep with your servant David my father that which you've promised him, saying, There shall not fail you a man in my sight to sit on the throne of Israel, if only your children take heed to their way to walk in my law, as you have walked before me. Now therefore, Yahweh, the God of Israel, let your word be verified, which you spoke to your servant David. Comment, Solomon's praying that the dynasty won't fail, but there's a requirement to perpetuating the dynasty in verse 16. Quote, if only your children take heed in their way, end quote. The gracious thing about it, the way it turned out, even though David's descendants did not take heed to their way, nevertheless Yahweh did perpetuate the dynasty by giving David the Messiah to be on the throne forever. The Messiah will be David's descendant, Matthew chapter 1, and the Messiah's kingdom will be more glorious than what David probably ever thought or imagined. So Yahweh came through on his end of the covenant, unbelievably. Though today we break the covenant, God graciously upholds us by the Messiah, as David's descendants broke the covenant, but Yahweh still upheld his promise to David by the Messiah. Now, speaking of the unlikely idea that the God of the universe would inhabit a temple made of rocks and wood and allow his name to be used on it, verse 18. But will God indeed dwell with men on the earth? Behold, heaven and the heaven of heavens can't contain you, how much less this house which I've built. Yet have respect for the prayer of your servant and to his supplication, Yahweh my God, to listen to the cry and to the prayer which your servant prays before you, that your eyes may be open toward this house day and night, even toward the place where you've said that you would put your name, to listen to the prayer which your servant will pray toward this place. Comment, in other words, I wouldn't ordinarily expect you to pay any attention to me or to this place, but you said you would allow us to attach your name to it. Therefore, please uphold your name by listening to me day or night when I pray toward it. Verse 21. Listen to the petitions of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Yes, hear from your dwelling place, even from heaven, and when you hear, forgive. Comment, coming up, Solomon wants the temple to be a place where the people can bring their problems to Yahweh. Verse 22. If a man sins against his neighbor and an oath is laid on him to cause him to swear, and he comes and swears before your altar in this house, then hear from heaven, act, and judge your servants, bringing retribution to the wicked, to bring his way on his own head, and justifying the righteous, to give him according to his righteousness. Comment, that might be hard to understand, but it's easy to explain. In Exodus 22, if there was any dispute that couldn't be resolved, both parties were to come before God and take an oath in his presence to tell the truth, the same way we do nowadays in court. With the truth in the open, the case would be resolved. The case might be aired by actually coming to the tabernacle or to the temple and taking an oath there, or by taking an oath on the temple or on the altar from a distance, as in Matthew 23:18. Solomon prayed in verses 22 and 23 that Yahweh would hold each party to his oath, that he would punish anyone who dared lie in his presence, and reward the party who was in the right. Quote, hear from heaven, act, and judge your servants, bringing a retribution to the wicked, to bring his way on his own head, and justifying the righteous, to give him according to his righteousness. End quote. Now, how the temple will play a role in resolving other situations, verse 24. If your people Israel are struck down before the enemy because they've sinned against you, and they turn again and confess your name and pray and make supplication before you in this house, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them again to the land which you gave to them and to their fathers. When the sky is shut up and there's no rain because they've sinned against you, if they pray toward this place and confess your name and turn from their sin when you afflict them, then hear in heaven and forgive the sin of your servants of your people Israel, when you teach them the good way in which they should walk, and send rain on your land, which you've given to your people for an inheritance. If there's famine in the land, if there's pestilence, if there's blight or mildew, locust or caterpillar, if their enemies besiege them in the land of their cities, whatever plague or whatever sickness there is, whatever prayer and supplication is made by any man or by all your people Israel, who will each know his own plague and his own sorrow, and shall spread out his hands toward this house, then hear from heaven your dwelling place, and forgive, and render to every man according to all his ways, whose heart you know, for you, even you only, know the hearts of the children of men, that they may fear you to walk in your ways, so long as they live in the land which you gave to our fathers. Comment: in all those situations, Solomon's asking Yahweh to let the temple be a contact point between him and his people. Thus, even up to the present day, people go to Jerusalem and insert prayer requests into the cracks of the western wall at the ruins of the temple foundation. However, now that we're the temple of God, we don't have to go to the temple or pray in its direction. Our prayers don't even have to reach the ceiling because God is with us. It sounds unlikely, but God's chosen to dwell in us and not in a stone temple. Quote, "Don't you know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you?" 1 Corinthians 6:19. So we don't need to pray in any certain direction. Now more situations, verse 32. "Moreover, concerning the foreigner who is not of your people Israel, when he comes from a far country for your great name's sake, and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm, when they come and pray toward this house, then hear from heaven, even from your dwelling place, and do according to all that the foreigner calls to you for, that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your people Israel, and that they may know that this house which I have built is called by your name." Comment: that was an invitation to all nations to come to the temple and pray. Solomon prays that Yahweh's reputation will go so far and wide that even in ancient times, when travel was so difficult and dangerous, citizens of the nations would consider it worthwhile to come to Jerusalem to Yahweh's temple, or even in verse 32 that they might simply pray toward the place. Verse 34, "If your people go out to battle against their enemies, by whatever way you send them, and they pray to you toward this city which you've chosen, and the house which I built for your name, then hear from heaven their prayer and their supplication, and maintain their cause. If they sin against you, for there's no man who doesn't sin, and you're angry with them, and deliver them to the enemy so that they carry them away captive to a land far off or near. Yet if they come to their senses in the land where they're carried captive, and turn again and make supplication to you in the land of their captivity, saying, 'We've sinned, we've done perversely, and have dealt wickedly,' if they return to you with all their heart and with all their soul in the land of their captivity, where they've carried them captive, and pray toward their land which you've given to their fathers, and the city which you've chosen, and toward the house which I built for your name, then hear from heaven, even from your dwelling place, their prayer and their petitions, and maintain their cause, and forgive your people who've sinned against you." Comment: Solomon's read Leviticus chapter 26, that Yahweh's sworn that he'll have Israel attacked, overrun, and the people taken captive to faraway lands if they're incorrigibly disobedient. Leviticus 26:33. He prays it even then, if they're repentant and pray toward the temple, that Yahweh will forgive them and maintain their cause. Verse 40. "Now, my God, let, I beg you, your eyes be open, and let your ears be attentive to the prayer that is made in this place. Now therefore arise, Yahweh God, into your resting place, you and the ark of your strength. Let your priests, Yahweh God, be clothed with salvation, and let your saints rejoice in goodness. Yahweh God, don't turn away the face of your anointed. Remember your loving kindnesses to David your servant." Comment: Solomon says, "You told David this would be your house, therefore let all the prayers of your kings, priests, and people be answered here." 1 Chronicles 7 is next.